views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Good evening and welcome to BronxTalk and our first in-studio political debate in 2 years. Tonight we present a debate between the three candidates who are running for Assembly in the Democratic primary for the 82nd Assembly District. This is a district that includes the Bronx neighborhoods of Baychester, City Island, Co-op City, Country Club, Locust Point, Pelham Bay, and Throgs Neck. Tonight's program is presented in conjunction with the League of Women Voters, a nonpartisan political organization that advocates for informed and active participation in government and works to increase understanding of major public policy issues. And also by City Limits, the Bronx Times, and the Norwood News. The Democratic primary is on June 28, and all eligible voters are urged to vote. The last day to apply in person for an absentee ballot is June 27th, 2022. The last day to postmark primary election ballots is June 28th. Primary election ballots must be received by the county board no later than July 5th. The early voting period is from June 18th to June 26th. For more information on all of that, you can visit vote.nyc. Now let's meet the candidates. The incumbent is Michael Benedetto. Mr. Benedetto is a former teacher who has served in the Assembly since his election in 2004. He is the chair of the Assembly's Education Committee. Assemblyman, nice to have you with us.
Pleasure to be here, Gary.
Al Quattlebaum is a Co-op City resident, a husband, father, minister, business owner, and a U.S. Army and National Guard veteran. Nice to have you with us, Mr. Quattlebaum, and thank you, of course, for your service to our country.
Thank you for having me.
Jonathan Soto has been the executive director of the Mayor's Office for Faith and Community Partnerships and has experience in law, urban planning, human rights advocacy, government administration, and public education advocacy. So nice to have you with us, Mr. Soto.
Good to be here.
Candidates in tonight's debate, I will direct a question to one candidate. That candidate will respond, and then each candidate will get 90 seconds to respond to the question before we proceed to the next question. Candidates will receive 30 and 15-second verbal time warning, and that comes from our in-studio timekeeper, Yari Encarnacion. Thank you, Yari, for joining us this evening. And the moderator, that's me, I reserve the right to ask any follow-up question and also to allow for rebuttals and dialogue. Please note that after the initial answers, no statement can be longer than 30 seconds, and we ask that candidates be respectful and not talk over each other. Just raise your hand and I will recognize you. We're happy to have you participate. Also, there will be no opening statements, but at the end of the program, each candidate will be given the opportunity to offer a 1-minute concluding comment. One final note before we begin. On tonight's program, the questions include those submitted by the candidates themselves. Okay, let's get to our first question, and that by prior agreement goes to you, Mr. Quattlebaum. Talk about your experience, your understanding of the needs of the 82nd Assembly District, and why presumably you think you are the best candidate to serve in the Assembly.
Thank you for that question, and thank you for having us. The 82nd Assembly District is comprised of a melting pot. And as a minister, as a business owner, I understand what we need in our community. As a veteran, you know, we have veteran needs. We have a lot of veterans in and around our district. We need to have someone that understands and cares about the community. During the height of the pandemic, my organization was out there feeding up to 5,000 people a month. We worked to get people help. we talk to people, we embrace people, we're there. As a minister of the church, my job as a minister of the church is to work with people. So I have empathy for our district, and it's time that we have people that are empathetic. I mean, I don't have government experience, but what person that went into government had government experience when they first got in?
Thank you very much. Mr. Soto, same question for you, sir.
So I'm organizing for whole communities and safe streets because our streets cannot be safe if we are not whole in our budgets, if we're not whole in our access to mental health services, to good education, if we're not whole, our environment, living in a coastal community that is at risk in this increasing cataclysmic time of climate change. I believe que en comunidades seguras y calles seguras es algo que estamos tratando de hacer para nuestro vecindario. I'm a public school parent trained in law and urban planning, organizing to fight for those that have been most impacted and most adversely impacted by the series of crises that are affecting us today. We need not only access to better education, we have so many overcrowded schools. I'm a parent of an 11-year-old daughter that has felt deeply insecure in her specific situation. We need access not only to the incredible amount of potential that exists in every Bronxite, but we need to be clear about our priorities. We need to move away from a culture and policymaking of fear to one of care. When we are rooted in policies of fear, we create cycles of violence that we cannot get out of. I am deeply and intimately familiar with the fear that exists. There was a shooting a couple of blocks from my daughter's school. There are threats to her safety that are happening consistently.
Thank you.
And I am the candidate that's going to make sure that we're organizing for whole communities and safe streets.
Mr. Benedetto?
I think I'm the only candidate who has lived in this community their whole lives, as I have. I've worked for this community before I was even elected. As a matter of fact, and I no longer belong to the newspaper, but the Bronx Times Reporter, one of your sponsors for this very program. I started the Bronx Times Reporter. That's how involved I've been in this community. I know the people, I know the issues, I know the history of this area. And so I worked for this community. I participated in this community, and then I was elected. I was elected because the people knew me. They knew I had an interest in it. I had a track record. I had a resume. And I think I've shown them my resume was right for this seat, because during those years, I worked hard for the community, okay, as the assemblyman, getting things for the community, things like the coming of the Metro North Railroad, things like the Ferry Point ferry going into Manhattan, the bus relocation, the bus reorganization plan for the Bronx, and saving the Co-op City buses and the Troggs Neck buses. I did it before, I did it during, I'll do it in the future.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. Mr. Soto, you talked about crime and crime fighting. You're quoted as saying you think the state's law enforcement budget should be reduced by a quarter or half. What is your vision of the NYPD, and why do you recommend that sort of budget cut?
So one of the things that we've seen, especially with policing, is that we are asking our police officers to do way too much. I entirely disagree with the recent mayor proposal to cut education budgets by $250 million while increasing police budgets, when we're seeing that we're very well funded when it comes to reacting to crime. I'm principled, and I'm arguing that we need to prevent crime from happening. We need to take care of every public servant. And police officers shouldn't be handling people that have mental illness. Police officers are too burdened in our society, and as we've seen in recent incidents in different schools, that oftentimes just having more police does not necessarily result in safety, as we saw in Uvalde and as we've seen in many different areas. We need investments in mental health, investments in housing, investments in our climate and ensuring that our police officers are not overburdened. And we're entering these cycles of violence where we're not addressing proactively the issues of crime. I am clear that as a public school parent, I am intimately aware of the violence that may threaten us, and we can't continue down this path of status quo as we've seen crime increase during the last year, even though we have different leadership that's not necessarily doing their job.
Mr. Benedetto, your thought on NYPD and security and police budgets?
A number one priority of the people in any neighborhood is safety, is security. We need a well-trained police force to do that. We can't, as I believe my opponent has suggested, that we defund the police, that we eliminate and abolish the police. That's not an answer. What we got to do is have good policing to make sure our citizenry is safe. Safe to walk the streets, safe to go shopping, safe to bring their children to school, and a safe environment for our kids, okay? I'm talking about good policing, policing who understand what they're working against and how to treat people with problems, okay? But number one, in the minds of people, is they've got to be safe in their homes, safe in their neighborhoods.
We'll let you respond, Mr. Quattlebaum, first, and then you can respond. Mr. Quattlebaum, your thoughts?
Safety is my number one priority as when I take office. I'm not for defund the police. We're using wrong words. The words should be reallocated, as I believe my opponent is saying. We don't need to defund anything. And how do you retrain, or how do you train the greatest police department, the best trained police department in the United States? We need to basically bring resources into our community to prevent crime. And that's reallocating resources to mental health. That's reallocating resources to our joblessness. We need to tackle crime, and that's the way we tackle crime. If kids are too tired because they're working, they will not be able to commit crime.
Mr. Soto gets 30 seconds now to rebut, and then we can keep the dialogue going. I know this is a very important topic, so let's, Mr. Soto, what do you think?
Sure. It's not about defunding. It's about divesting in what doesn't serve us and investing in what serves us. It is outrageous that we have more police safety officers than we have mental health counselors in our school, when the majority of the threats that are happening are from teenagers who don't have access to mental health services in our schools. I know because there were threats in my daughter's schools, specifically around these issues, and just because we have more presence of police officers, which again are overburdened, and we're harming them by telling them to do more than what they need to do instead of investing in what prevents crime. And that's my commitment, and we will not yield to fear-mongering around issues that we need to be proactive about.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to respond? Go ahead, Mr. Quattlebaum. 30 seconds.
My opponent, Mike Benedetto, says that he's been silent when it comes to crime. He has not spoken out against the shootings that are happening, the mass shootings. He signed for bail reform. So what is his stance on crime? If you're silent, then you're complicit or you're part of the problem.
Go ahead, Mr. Benedetto. I'm sure you want to respond. 30
Yes,
seconds. Sir.
I certainly do. I understand the need for mental health services, and that's why, as the education chair in the State Assembly, we have put an enormous amount of money, $40 million statewide, into just dealing with health issues. That's why when I talked to the chancellor of the New York City school system, he assured me that every single school in the New York City system has enough money to deal and hire mental health professionals. That should be preeminent in our discussion here.
Thank you very much. Mr. Benedetto, a question for you. You talked about being the education chair. Advocates for special ed children are anxious to pass Assembly Bill A9287. I'm sure you're familiar with it. That would protect children with disabilities and their families from the city's control over hearing officers. They say that those officers must be totally impartial and not be employees of New York City or city-controlled agencies. Yet, the bill has not emerged from the Education Committee. Why not?
Why not? It's a nice question. I'm glad you asked that question because there's a lot of misconceptions going around. What people don't know is that for years, there was a backlog in hearing cases where children are looking for correct services, okay? And the backlog totaled some 10,000 cases, okay? This happened year after year after year. The federal government was complaining to the state education department. Everybody was complaining to the New York City education department. They were doing nothing. Finally, we said we've had enough, and we passed a bill last year to make sure these children get their services. The city came to an agreement with the state education department to have them hired by oath. Okay, the Office of Hearing in the city. The cases that were 10,000 long is now down to 2,000. Okay, everybody seems to be very happy with oath and their independence, and that they're able to come to a fair decision in these cases.
Mr. Quattlebaum, and then you, Mr. Soto.
I hear the same thing that we keep hearing from state legislators now, pointing fingers instead of getting the job done. I'm tired of hearing this person didn't do it, that person didn't do it, it's because of that, because of the. Let's get the job done. It's time for us to stand up for our children. We need common sense people. I'm a common sense candidate that's going to go in there and simply do the job. Our children are suffering because of bureaucracy. We need common sense legislators that are going to get the job done. Pointing fingers at every agency doesn't do anything for our children. And who suffers? Mostly the black and brown children of our communities. They're the ones suffering. It's time for us to get legislators in Albany that is going to do the job. Albany is considered by the New York Times the most corrupt agency, the most corrupt. How does that happen? How do you expect things to get done if you're the most corrupt? Everybody's trying to protect their jobs. It's time for somebody to protect our children.
Thank you, Mr. Soto.
So two things are true. One, the federal law precludes and prohibits and expresses the conflicts of interest that exists when you have a city agency that's advocating and adjudicating cases of children with special needs and special education. Two, the mayor has control now over this process, and this is something that is out of control because special education parents and advocates have been calling for the passage of this bill to ensure that their rights are protected. Mr. Benedetto has yielded to the mayor with mayoral control, something I'm totally against, especially when the mayor is proposing a $250 million cut to the Education Committee. And second, parents and special needs advocates do not want the same judge overseeing it that's then responsible, or the hearing officers that are reporting to the mayor itself. Oath is a mayoral agency, and the federal law specifically states that no city agency should be, or employees of that agency or of the district should be overseeing this. We need to have leadership that's going to stand up for the most vulnerable in our communities. And special education and kids with special needs should not in any way, shape, or form be left aside in order to give the mayor more control over the education system.
Mr. Benedetto, presumably you want to respond.
Oath is a city agency, but they are independent city agency, and the people who are going to be the hearing officers have fixed terms, so they can't be removed, so they can be efficient. The cases have dwindled down, and that is a good thing. And something is finally happening with these cases. And, you know, you criticize about mayoral control. How interesting that you used to work for the mayor. You worked for Mayor de Blasio. You never criticized mayoral control then. Why are you contributing and criticizing it now? Is it just political expediency?
Go ahead. You can respond.
Oh, of course.
Go ahead.
I've criticized Mayor de Blasio on many things because I am never going to be owned by the leadership that's in Albany or in the state. I will fight when something is wrong and it's unjust. And mayoral control as a public school parent whose daughter is going now to the 6th grade does not serve our interests or serve our needs. The mayor did not provide a remote option, and something Mr. Benedetto was quiet about. When we saw the raging cases in our schools, he was silent. And it was the mayor that wanted to force kids to expose themselves to COVID instead of providing a remote option for those who want it.
We will get to mayoral control in a moment. We'll use that as a separate question because it's a very large issue. Obviously, it's something that is on everybody's mind. Mr. Quattlebaum talked about bail reform. The state's bail reform legislation ending cash bail in most cases involving misdemeanors and nonviolent felonies went into effect at the start of 2020. While critics have blamed spikes in crime in part to the bail reform law, the Brennan Center recently said that there's no clear connection between recent crime increases and that law and claimed the data does not currently support further revisions to legislation. But with crime spiking, calls to reform the law, like you did just a moment ago, are getting louder. Are you satisfied with the law as it is written, or if you're elected to the Assembly, would you recommend revisions?
First, let me say when I'm elected to the Assembly.
I'll let others make that choice.
No, I'm not satisfied. Simply because we still have babies dying in our streets by people that are out on cashless bail. We don't need data. Let's ask the grieving mothers that are losing their babies every day. Let's ask the father that can't hug his son or daughter. Let's ask that mother. Let's ask the brother or sister that will never see their brother or their sibling again. Crime is running rampant. And it just so happens that this new bail reform that came in crime started ramping up. My opponent, Mr. Benedetto, voted for bail reform. Let's be clear on that. He voted for the bail reform. And when Mayor Adams, like him or love him, when Mayor Adams asked the state legislators to roll it back, the state legislators said no. The state legislators are tying our mayors of New York State's hands to fight crime. We need, again, I'm going to stick to this, common sense candidates that care about the job. Being a political leader or being someone that's elected, you have to be willing, or you must do what might not be popular with the powers that be in order to help your constituency. I'm willing to lose my job once I become the assembly person to protect my citizens.
Mr. Soto?
As you mentioned, a lot of the data has shown that increases in crime are not necessarily correlated or caused by bail reform. However, one of the things we need to remember is the reason why reform was made in the beginning. Khalif Browder, a young black man who was thrown into Rikers because of unjust cash bail, which not only led to the loss of his life, but to the grave injustices that have happened throughout the issue of bail. Additionally, I am very concerned about the media's incessant injection of fear when it comes to this narrative. I do not want to see this become a slippery slope to bring back stop and frisk, to bring back the anti-crime units. I, as a person of faith, believe that we need to shift from a narrative of fear to one of care. But as Al Quattlebaum mentioned, that at least he's clear on his position. But Mr. Benedetto voted for bail reform, and then when it became politically convenient, he then shifted back. So if you really are interested in a candidate that has a clear stance on bail reform, then Al Quattlebaum is your candidate. But if you want someone that flip-flopping and waffling on the issue of bail reform, that's something that Mr. Benedetto's done. But I want to be clear. The data, it's dangerous out there. Fear and this issue of public safety is not theoretical for me, especially as someone that has a child.
you.
There's been shooting in their areas, but we need to be clear about
Thank
who
you.
is the real options and who has said the right things.
Mr. Benedetto, I'm sure you have something you want to say about this.
Oh, for sure. Yes, I voted for bail reform, and that was the good vote. Bail reform, bail was being abused, okay? There were too many people thrown into jail, incarcerated, without trials, and it needed to be reformed. Now, if you do something and you don't want to make an admission that maybe you made a mistake, that maybe you made an error in judgment, then you don't deserve to be in office. And so, yes, we voted for bail reform. We did the right thing. And when we saw that maybe we went a little bit too far, we tweaked it. And we tweaked it twice. We didn't waffle. We tried to make it work better. And that's what a legislator does, okay? He legislates, they evaluate what they do, and then if you have to make adjustments, you make those adjustments, and we did. Not once, but twice during the years that we first passed bail reform.
Thank you. Mr. Quattlebaum, you wanted to respond?
The only reason why the changes were made, let's be clear, is because of the pressure of the communities. It wasn't because you saw an injustice. It was because we, the public, started screaming. It was because we wanted the change. Judges needed more discretion. Okay, you granted that, but we went from one side of the pendulum to the other. Now we need to bring it back to the middle. The way we do that is bipartisan. We can't have totally democratic views on a bill. We need both sides because we live in a two-party system.
Thank you very much. Mr. Soto, there's a heated controversy surrounding a proposal to rezone Bruckner Boulevard in favor of a development project that would bring 339 apartments, 28% of which would be designated affordable, across two 8-story buildings, one 5-story building and one 3-story building. There would also be a super grocery store, apartments designated for veterans, office space, and after-school educational center, and recreational space for youth. But this project would not comply with the zoning ordinances that were established for the area in 2004. Do you support the rezoning of Bruckner Boulevard to accommodate this project? And if you are against it, how do we create more affordable housing in the 82nd Assembly District?
So our zoning situation is Byzantine and in no way, shape, or form serves our community. It is not community-based planning, and I understand the deep concerns when it comes to the lack of infrastructure, when it comes to the lack of care and community-involved process for our situation. So this specific rezoning, first, I don't believe in, and I'm very concerned when we have private investment for affordable housing. We need full state funding and invest in deeply affordable housing. I will say, and I'm going to be very clear, that a lot of the opposition that's happened to it has a racial tone that wants to exclude black and brown people from the neighborhood, and I felt that deeply, and that deeply concerns me. We need more affordable housing in our district. One of the things that I would love to see is that the huge golf course, which is Donald Trump, and that Benedetto took $6,000 from Donald Trump, how about we create housing there? Why is it that we haven't had long-term planning to think about so much of that huge park space, which in 2033 will end? I'm committed to establishing a long-term plan to make sure that when that contract ends, we create truly affordable housing on that wretched golf course from Donald Trump, who gave Mr. Benedetto $6,000, who also created a ferry spot that is not accessible to the residents in NYCHA. Again, that specific rezoning is not community-based. We need more density in our community, and we should do it in the golf course that he took money from.
Mr. Benedetto.
First off, I'm against the rezoning, okay? I'm building of those houses, okay? I'm not against building more houses, but I think it should be planned, and they should be put where there's the proper infrastructure for those houses. So you build it around subway stations. The number 6 line runs right through my district. There are spaces there near the number 6 line. It's a perfectly appropriate place to build those houses, okay? The upzoning that has been proposed was just downzoned 15 years ago, okay? There were community hearings on this. They all wanted it. Everybody voted on it. Why are you changing it now? Why don't you build those houses where those houses should be built, around the place where there's infrastructure? Now, for this Trump golf course, it's unfortunate that you don't know the history of that piece of land. Okay, that piece of land is parkland. So I really don't know about constructing apartment buildings on that particular piece of property. But that plan was a landfill. It was for 30 years a blight on the community. Fire trucks had to go out there constantly. Drag racing was going on in that area. Finally, underneath Councilman DeMarco, the idea of having a golf course was built, and that's how it came out.
Mr. Quattlebaum, go ahead.
It's interesting that the assemblyman says that he's against upzoning. And I am too. Let me be clear on that. I am against upzoning. People move to the Northeast Bronx for low-density housing. That's what they moved there for. They didn't move there to later on in life have an 8-story building come up or a 5-story building to come up. Now, I'm for veterans, but this proposal just has an air about it. But let me ask, I got to ask this question. Mr. Soto said that Mike took $6,000 from Trump. So regardless if that's parkland and we can't build on it, I get that. But how do you take money from someone that was calling the first African-American president un-American, and you take money from that guy? I mean, that was in 2016, 2014, when that happened. How does that even happen? And I don't think our voters and our constituents know this fact. He took $6,000 in-kind service and cash from Donald J. Trump at the time that Donald Trump was calling Barack Obama un-American.
Thank you. Mr. Soto first, and I'm sure Mr. Benedetto has a response as well. Go ahead.
So Battery Park City, where we have so much development, right, downtown, was a landfill. I'm a planner. I'm an urban planner. I'm trained. You could build there. The thing that is lacking is innovative mind and political will. I will make sure that we create long-term plans in order to make sure that we have the development of housing in our community. But as Al says, is absolutely right. It's irrelevant what the use was. You can't take money from Donald Trump after he called Mexicans rapists. You can't take money from Donald Trump after he called the first African-American president, President Barack Obama, a person who actually didn't have an actual certificate. So I know that we could have innovative planning. Remember, Battery Park City, landfill, we could develop there. The problem is not possibility, but lack of political will and imagination.
Thank you. Mr. Benedetto, you'll get the final word here.
Let's be clear. I never took cash from Donald Trump. I took some in-kind gifts from Ghana, but I took them before he was even considered running for president. All we knew about Donald Trump at that time was he was a very odd personality on TV. But a lot of people took money from Donald Trump and took contributions from Donald Trump. I was the only candidate who gave back. I was so embarrassed that I took this type of money. I gave the money not back to him, I gave it back to the New York Immigrant Coalition, okay? Because that man was a cancer on America, cancer on democracy.
Go ahead. We'll give you the final word.
Mike said that he didn't get cash. It's in the in financial disclosures. He took $2,500 in cash from Donald Trump.
Yeah, he just lied.
So
2015.
he just lied.
Just lied to you.
Do you want to respond?
like just look at the campaign finance, and
all
you will
you gotta
see,
do.
and it's
Right.
very clear. We shouldn't have
Do you
elected
wanna
officials who
respond,
are
then we
lying
wanna move on?
about taking money.
And my only response is I gave back 6,000 some odd dollars, okay, to the New York Immigration Coalition.
Who has endorsed me.
Because I was
Stand-
so embarrassed.
But
with
you
that.
just said you didn't take cash from them.
Yeah, it's
Stand by. Let's go to the last question, and let's get back to mayoral control of schools. Mayor Adams, who did endorse your campaign, was disappointed that mayoral control of schools was approved for only 2 years. So what is your feeling about mayoral control of schools? And did the legislature make a mistake in not giving the mayor 4 years that he sought?
Number one, giving the mayor control of the city schools was the right decision to make. If it was up to me, I would have done it maybe for 3 years, give him a little more time to act. But everybody doesn't get what you necessarily want in politics. You got to compromise. And what we came up with was a good compromise. We gave control of the school systems, rightly, to the mayor, okay? The man who is answerable to us if we don't like what's going on. Also, we listened to criticisms, and we increased the voice of the parents on the PEP, okay, the Panel for Educational Policy. Plus, we decided educationally it was better for our kids, especially in the younger grades, to have smaller class sizes. And so, in conjunction with all that, we passed a bill to do that. Level the classes down, cap them at certain sizes, especially in the lower grades, and do something about...
Did you want to see the mayor get the 4 years he requested, or was the 2 years at this point sufficient for you?
I thought 3 years was best, but like I say, compromise, 2 years is okay.
Mr. Quattlebaum?
There was a New York Post article this week, I believe it was this week, that talks about the class sizes next year are going to be larger because of the cuts that are coming to the New York City school system. But the education chair, let's be clear, Mike Benedetto is the education chair. The Bronx is one of the largest failing school districts in the state of New York. So when we're talking about mayoral control, I wrote an op-ed in the Bronx Times saying, what does Mike Benedetto have against Eric Adams? And I was specifically talking about this topic because he at one point was totally against mayoral control. Then he met with David Banks and he tweeted, he did not put out a retraction of that. He tweeted that he supports David Banks. Then he is waffling on the mayoral control thing. Then they passed when Governor Hochul put in the budget for 4 years in January. So where's your stance on this? I mean, you're for it, you're against it, you're in the middle. We need straightforward thinkers when it comes to our children, not people that flip-flop whichever way the prevailing political winds go.
Mr. Soto?
As a public school parent with a daughter in the schools, we were advocating for remote options and we did not receive one. Therefore, parent voice is in no way, shape, or form forcing the city to respond to us. I believe in an alternative of municipal control. I do believe in local control. We should have and empower the public advocate and the controller to have oversight over the chancellor pick. We should make sure that we have decentralized oversight and centralized operations. As a planner, that's a system that could work. But Mayor Adams proposing a $250 million cut when he just endorsed Michael Benedetto is something that I think is not only ironic, but it's something that does not serve and is not the education vision that we want to see for our communities.
Okay, we're almost out of time, Mr. Benedetto. I know this is an important topic for you.
Very
you can
quickly.
just say a few things and then we'll be
CFE
closing
decision said for years the city was being shortchanged with the amount of money. There was a decision that came down saying billions of dollars were needed in the city coffers. I was able to get that money, okay? The city has more money because of me and because of my colleagues on Albany following my lead in there right now to do the things to educate our children.
Gentlemen, it's time for the closing statements. I think we've heard from everybody, and everybody got a sense of who everybody is. Mr. Quattlebaum, you have 1 minute for closing statement.
When you're ready for, if you're ready for change, I'm your candidate. Let's just cut right through the chase. I'm your candidate for change. The 82nd, Mike Benedetto is the education chair. And the Bronx is failing in the schools. Bronx is failing as far as school system. What has he really done in 16 years? Sure, he'll tote that he's done this, he's done that, but our children are getting left behind. Crime is running rampant. I will be that assembly person that will be tough on crime, that will be your education leader. Now, I don't have a degree in education. I was never a teacher. I am a real person that opened up a business, that raised the family in the district, and I care about the district. I don't care about political whims. All I care about is you. My name is Al Quattlebaum. Vote for me on June 28th.
Jonathan Soto?
So I'm organizing for whole communities and safe streets. Estoy organizando por comunidades enteras y calles seguras. I'm a public school parent trained in law and urban planning that's going to make sure that we take back what the status quo has taken from us. We need to shift and acknowledge that fear is real, but we can't legislate based on fear because fear corrupts the soul. We need to move from a fear-based model to a care-based model where we invest in our housing and our mental health, and we prove and provide innovative and principled leadership in these chaotic times. During this pandemic, I organized to provide over 500 students with free homework help. I have been endorsed by our congressional representative, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and I'm going to fight to make sure that our whole communities and safe streets is something that we do together, because it's not about me. It's not about what I can do. It's about what we can do together. So vote for me. Early voting starts soon. Jonathan Soto, and it's going to be a pleasure to serve you in the assembly.
Thank you very much, Mr. Benedetto.
I'm a school teacher. I taught in our community. I'm now head of the education committee in Albany. It is a privilege to serve you. I served you before I was even elected. I worked in that community. My opponents really don't have a resume. They didn't work in the community. They belong to no organizations that are neighborhood organizations, community boards. They don't belong to that. They don't belong to the 45th Precinct Council. Somewhat, you want to abolish the police, okay? I have worked beforehand for the community. I worked for the community, getting the Ferry Point Ferry in place, the Metro North Station, the redesign for Co-op City. I want to continue working for the community. I did it in the past. I'm doing it now. I want to do it in the future. And when you have people who have nothing on their resume to say, this is my community, I work for it, why would they work for it now?
And when you have someone that lies to the viewers on TV, that's a problem. So that happens.
Al Quattlebaum,
right?
thank you. Jonathan Soto, thank you. Michael Benedetto, thank you. Candidates, while you might not agree on everything, I know you'll agree that every eligible voter should be out there voting on June 28th. If you want more information about all the voting deadlines, you visit vote.nyc. Our sponsors, we want to thank them, the League of Women Voters, also City Limits, the Bronx Times, and the Norwood News. Our producers, Rebecca Hemick and Stephen Powell, did a great job. Thank Yari, our timekeeper. And we'll see you next week. We'll do the 81st Assembly District next week. Good night.